I stared at the cream-colored index card in my shaking hands, completely frozen in my kitchen. It was sandwiched right between a stack of junk mail and a pre-approved credit card offer, but the spidery, elegant cursive handwriting immediately made the breath catch in my throat. Lemon cake with mustard. Bake at 400 degrees. Do not bring icing. My name is Emma. I am 32 years old and I am the undisputed, officially certified scapegoat of the Johnson family. To anyone else, that recipe would look like a sick culinary joke from a confused old woman. But it wasn't a joke, it was a distress code. Grandma Maggie and I had come up with it over 20 years ago, back when I was a kid trying to hide from my mother's screaming matches. Mustard meant trouble. Do not bring icing meant come exactly as you are, and come completely alone. I hadn't seen that code since I was in middle school. To understand why my heart was suddenly hammering against my ribs, you have to understand the toxic nightmare that is my family hierarchy. My parents, Susan and Richard, spent my entire life making sure I knew my exact place, the bottom, while my younger sister, Chloe, was the undeniable golden child. The pristine daughter whose college 529 plan was fully funded before she even hit kindergarten. I was treated as entirely useless. Chloe got the down payment for her gorgeous suburban cul-de-sac home handed to her on a silver platter. I paid my own way through community college by working double shifts at a diner, meticulously building my credit score from scratch while they constantly reminded me I was the difficult one. To my mother, I was basically the hired help, only kept around for when she needed someone to blame or someone to help move heavy furniture. But Grandma Maggie never treated me like that. She was my only safe harbor. I grabbed my car keys, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead, and practically flew out the door. The drive to Grandma's house took 20 minutes, but my knuckles were completely white on the steering wheel the entire time. When I finally pulled into her long, oak-lined driveway, my stomach violently plummeted. My mother's luxury SUV was parked aggressively on the front lawn, and Chloe's pristine white sedan was blocking the garage doors. I marched up to the front porch, the blue ring of the front door camera glowing ominously as it recorded my arrival. Before I could even raise my fist to knock, the heavy wooden door flew open. There stood Susan, my mother, wearing her typical country club tennis skirt. She looked frantic, her chest heaving, but she immediately forced a terrifyingly sweet plastic smile onto her face. "Emma, what on earth are you doing here?" Her eyes darted nervously over my shoulder, scanning the driveway to see if I had brought anyone with me. Chloe popped up right behind her, sipping from a half-empty Starbucks iced matcha latte. "Yeah? Didn't Mom tell you? Grandma is having a really bad day," Chloe sighed, rolling her eyes like she was talking about a stubborn toddler. "She's completely losing her mind, Em. We're actually looking into some nice memory care facilities for her. It's so tragic." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. A hot prickle of pure anger flared at the base of my neck. Losing her mind? Grandma Maggie did the Sunday crosswords or in pen every single weekend and managed her own stock portfolio. I forced a vacant, passive smile playing right into their perception of me. "Oh wow, I had no idea. I just wanted to drop by and say hi. I'll be super quick." Before my mother could physically block the entryway, I ducked under her arm and pushed past them into the hallway. "Emma, wait!" my mother hissed, her sweet tone dropping into a venomous snarl. I ignored her and power-walked straight into the sunroom. Grandma Maggie was sitting in her floral armchair. She looked smaller than usual, her frail hands trembling slightly in her lap. But when she looked up, her eyes weren't confused or cloudy. They were sharp, and they were absolutely terrified. Susan suddenly hovered right in the doorway behind me like a prison guard on high alert. "Just 2 minutes, Emma. She's very agitated today, and we need to let her rest." I knelt beside Grandma's chair, keeping my back to my mother so she couldn't see my face. "Hey, Gran," I whispered softly. Grandma leaned forward, her frail arms wrapping around my neck in a desperate tight hug. As she pulled me close, her face pressed against my shoulder, I felt it. A stiff, folded piece of paper was shoved violently down the neckline of my sweater. She patted my chest once, her eyes wide and pleading as she pulled back. "I'm just so tired, dear," she said aloud, her voice wavering perfectly for my mother's benefit. I played dumb. I kissed her cheek, stood up, and practically ran out of the house, ignoring Chloe's snarky comments about my outfit as I passed them in the foyer. Once I was back in my car, I slammed the door, locked it, and slumped back against the seat. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely fish the stiff paper out of my shirt. I unfolded it and flattened it against the center console. It wasn't a handwritten note. It was a heavily redacted bank statement from Grandma's joint checking account, stapled directly to a printed email draft. I recognized my mother's email address at the top. It was sent to a sketchy local estate attorney. I read the words, all the blood instantly draining from my face. Need the declaration of incompetence executed by Friday. We will be liquidating the estate immediately upon her transfer to the facility. Please expedite the wire transfers to Chloe's primary account to cover the remaining debts. My vision blurred with absolute rage. They were declaring her incompetent to steal her entire life savings and lock her away. I spent the next 24 hours vibrating with a level of rage I didn't even know my body could process. The sheer audacity of it all made me physically nauseous. My mother and sister weren't just gaslighting our entire extended family, they were systematically plotting to strip the one person who actually loved me of her freedom, her dignity, and her life savings. I needed more proof. The single piece of paper shoved down my sweater was a smoking gun. But if I went to the police right now, my mother, the master manipulator, would spin a brilliant, tearful story about a misunderstanding and paint me as the hysterical, jealous scapegoat daughter. I needed the rest of the puzzle. I needed to act exactly like the useless, compliant pawn they always told me I was. The next morning, I forced myself to swallow down the bile rising in my throat and called my mother. I made my voice sound small, meek, and utterly defeated. "Hi, Mom," I said, pinching the bridge of my nose as I squeezed my eyes shut. "I was thinking about what you said yesterday about Grandma. If she's really slipping that badly, you're probably overwhelmed. Do you want me to come over and start packing up her spare bedroom for the move?" Through the phone receiver, I could practically hear my mother's smug, self-satisfied smirk. The narcissist in her simply couldn't resist free labor, especially from me. "Well, Emma, I suppose it's about time you actually stepped up and contributed to this family." Susan sighed, laying the guilt on thick. "Chloe is completely exhausted from carrying the emotional burden of all this. Come over at noon. And don't make a mess." When I pulled up to the house at exactly 12 o'clock, the suburban stars had magically aligned in my favor. Susan was standing at the edge of the driveway, completely engrossed in an aggressive conversation with the president of the local homeowners association. She was waving her hands frantically, clearly discussing the parking logistics for her massive, highly anticipated 4th of July cul-de-sac barbecue she hosted every single year. My mother lived for neighborhood validation. She wouldn't step away from the HOA president for at least 20 minutes. I slipped through the front door. The house was dead quiet. Chloe's white sedan was in the garage, which meant she was probably asleep upstairs. She never woke up before 1 in the afternoon anyway. I didn't go to the spare bedroom. I ghosted straight down the hallway, my heart hammering a frantic, violent rhythm against my ribs, and slipped into my father's old home office. There, sitting carelessly on the mahogany desk, was my mother's iPad. Susan was a boomer who notoriously refused to use passcodes because she couldn't remember them. I tapped the screen. It opened instantly. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the tablet. I opened her email app first and typed estate into the search bar. Dozens of emails populated, but it was the attachments that made the room spin. I quickly opened a folder labeled Financials and clicked on the most recent PDF. It was a spreadsheet detailing a relentless, horrifying drain on Grandma Maggie's retirement accounts. Over the past 6 months, there had been systematic wire transfers from Grandma's accounts directly into a joint account controlled by Susan. But the money didn't stay there. It immediately funneled outward to pay off astronomical debts. I scrolled through the statements, my stomach dropping through the floor. Chloe's lifestyle was entirely subsidized by stolen elder funds. There were daily $20 Starbucks runs, weekly $500 Target hauls, and payments to boutique fitness studios. But the absolute worst part was the credit card payments. My mother had authorized 2 massive lump sum payments to zero out Chloe's drowning debt, $25,000. They had stolen $75,000 from an 82-year-old woman so my spoiled brat of a sister could maintain the illusion of being a successful, independent adult. I pulled out my phone and started rapidly snapping clear, high-resolution photos of every single screen. bank statements, emails, the sketchy lawyer's invoices. Then I saw the final document lying physically on the desk, under a coffee mug. It was a power of attorney form. At the bottom, Grandma Maggie's signature was scrawled out, but it was incredibly rigid and awkwardly traced. I had seen Grandma's elegant cursive my entire life. That signature was a blatant, pathetic forgery. Suddenly, the wooden floorboards in the hallway creaked. Heavy, shuffling footsteps were coming straight toward the office. My breath caught in my throat. I desperately shoved the power of attorney form back under the coffee mug, locked the iPad, and practically dove toward a stack of empty cardboard moving boxes in the corner of the room. The heavy oak door swung open. Chloe stood there wearing expensive silk pajamas, aggressively scrolling on her phone. She didn't even look up at first. "Mom, did you order my specialty vegan buns for the barbecue tomorrow?" Chloe whined, her voice dripping with entitlement. She finally glanced up and jumped, startled to see me kneeling on the floor holding a roll of packing tape. Her face instantly contorted into pure disgust. "Oh, it's just you," Chloe scoffed, crossing her arms. "What are you doing in here?" "The packing stuff is in the basement. Just looking for the tape dispenser," I lied, my voice remarkably steady despite the cold sweat dripping down my back. "Found it. I'm heading to the guest room now." Chloe rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck in her head. "Whatever. Try not to break anything. Grandma's antiques are worth a fortune, and Mom says we're putting them up for auction next week." She turned and sauntered into the kitchen. The second she was out of sight, I practically collapsed against the wall, clutching my phone to my chest. I had everything. I spent 2 hours pretending to pack boxes before making a quiet exit. I didn't drive home. I drove straight downtown to the heavily polished, mahogany-lined office of Mr. Davis, Grandma Maggie's original, actual estate lawyer, the man she had trusted for 30 years before my mother decided to freeze him out. I sat across from his massive desk, sliding the printed photos of the emails, the drained bank accounts, and the forged power of attorney across the glass. Mr. Davis adjusted his glasses, his face growing paler and paler with every page he turned. "This is unhinged," Mr. Davis whispered, looking up at me with sheer disbelief. "This isn't just unethical, Emma. This is a massive felony. They are bleeding her dry, and if they get this incompetence declaration pushed through a judge by Friday, they gain total legal immunity to liquidate the house." "We can't let that happen," I said, my voice finally cracking under the immense emotional weight. "What do we do?" "We skip the family drama," he said coldly, picking up his office phone. "We file an emergency injunction with the probate court right this second, and I am calling my direct contact at Adult Protective Services. We are going nuclear." The next 24 hours were a blur of absolute agonizing silence. I had to walk on eggshells, pretending nothing was wrong while the legal machinery operated in the shadows. It was now the afternoon of the 4th of July. The neighborhood barbecue was set to begin at 4 o'clock. I knew exactly what my mother was planning. She was going to stand in her perfectly manicured driveway, surrounded by the PTA moms, the HOA board, and all the neighbors she desperately wanted to impress. She was going to put on a sickeningly tragic performance, publicly announcing Grandma's rapid decline to build a fortress of neighborhood sympathy before she locked my grandmother away in a sterile facility on Monday morning. I was sitting in my car, staring blankly at my steering wheel, dreading the confrontation, when my phone vibrated in the cup holder. It was a text message from Mr. Davis. "The judge signed the emergency injunction 10 minutes ago. Adult Protective Services and the local authorities have been fully briefed. They will be on standby at the property at 5 o'clock. It's done." I locked my phone, stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror, and felt a dangerous, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. The trap was officially set, and my mother was about to walk right into it in front of 50 people. The suffocating smell of expensive charcoal and sweet barbecue sauce hung heavy in the humid, late afternoon air. The entire cul-de-sac was practically overflowing with people. My mother never just hosted a party. She staged suburban theatrical productions. The driveway was lined with Yeti coolers, neighbors in tailored khaki shorts were sipping from sweating red Solo cups, and an upbeat country playlist hummed from hidden wireless speakers. It was a picturesque, nauseatingly perfect American 4th of July. I parked half a block down, my hands trembling so violently I could barely pull the keys out of the ignition. I took a deep, shuddering breath, grabbed the heavy canvas tote bag sitting on the passenger seat, and forced myself to walk toward the house. Inside that bag were 30 thick, stapled manila folders. As I walked up the driveway, I spotted my mother holding court near the sprawling outdoor kitchen island. Susan was entirely in her element, wearing a flowing patriotic sundress, her hair perfectly blown out. Chloe stood right beside her, nursing a hard seltzer, playing the role of the devoted, exhausted golden child. Grandma Maggie was nowhere to be seen, likely confined to her bedroom so she wouldn't ruin the aesthetic of the party. At exactly 4:45, Susan clinked a silver spoon against her crystal wine glass. The sharp, high-pitched ringing cut through the chatter. The music was paused. 50 people turned their attention toward the patio. "Everyone, if I could just have your attention for a brief moment," Susan projected, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed, absolute fake agony. She actually reached up and dabbed the corner of her completely dry eye with a cocktail napkin. "I wanted to thank you all for coming, but I also need to share some deeply tragic family news. As many of you know, my mother Maggie has been declining." A collective murmur of sympathetic gasps rippled through the PTA moms and neighborhood busybodies. "It breaks my heart," Susan continued, placing a dramatic hand over her chest. "But for her own safety, and because the burden of her care has just become too overwhelming for Chloe and me, we are making the agonizing decision to transition her into a secure memory care facility on Monday." Chloe leaned her head on my mother's shoulder, looking absolutely miserable. The sheer, terrifying audacity of their gaslighting made the blood roar in my ears. They were literally asking for a round of applause for crossing the ultimate line. I didn't wait another second. I stepped right out of the crowd, the gravel crunching loudly under my boots, and marched directly into the center of the patio. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice ringing out louder and steadier than it ever had in my entire life, "I think you left out a few key financial details about Grandma's tragic decline." Susan's head snapped toward me, her fake, mournful expression instantly morphing into a glare of pure, unadulterated venom. "Emma, what are you doing? This is completely inappropriate." "Is it?" I asked, flashing a cold, razor-sharp smile. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the massive stack of folders. I turned to the woman standing closest to me, Linda, the famously gossipy HOA president, and shoved a folder directly into her hands. I began rapidly passing them out to the stunned neighbors. "What I think is inappropriate," I announced, raising my voice so every single person on that driveway could hear me, "is draining an 82-year-old woman's retirement account to pay off $75,000 of Chloe's credit card debt." The absolute silence that fell over the backyard was deafening. "Emma, shut your mouth right now!" Susan shrieked, her facade completely shattering. The mask was gone. She lunged forward, her face turning a blotchy, furious purple, but the HOA president physically stepped back, flipping open the folder. "Page 2, everyone," I called out, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I couldn't stop now. "You'll see the wire transfers. Over $50,000 funneled directly to Chloe over the last 6 months to pay for her daily Starbucks runs, her massive Target hauls, and her boutique gym memberships. And if you turn to page 4, you'll see the email my mother sent to a shady lawyer, plotting to have Grandma declared incompetent just so they could legally steal her house. She's a jealous, unhinged psycho," Chloe screamed, going completely feral. She dropped her drink, the glass shattering on the expensive pavers, and lunged at the nearest neighbor, violently trying to snatch the papers out of their hands. "Give me that! Don't look at that!" The neighbors were backing away in sheer horror, their eyes wide as they scanned the highlighted bank statements and the blatant, pathetic forgery of Grandma's signature on the power of attorney form. Disgust washed over the faces of the people my mother had spent decades trying to impress. "You are ruined," my mother hissed at me, her voice shaking with pure, narcissistic rage. "I will absolutely destroy you for this, Emma." "You can certainly try," I whispered, holding her furious gaze. Right on cue, at exactly 5 o'clock, the heavy, unmistakable sound of crunching tires echoed down the cul-de-sac. 2 marked police cruisers and an unmarked silver sedan pulled aggressively up to the curb, their red and blue lights flashing brilliantly against the manicured suburban lawns. Susan froze, her mouth falling open. Chloe stopped screaming, suddenly hyperventilating, her chest heaving in absolute panic as 4 uniformed officers and a stern-looking social worker from Adult Protective Services stepped out of the vehicles. They didn't even look at the stunned crowd of neighbors holding their red Solo cups. They marched straight up the driveway, bypassing the patio completely. "Susan and Chloe Johnson?" the lead officer demanded, his hand resting firmly on his utility belt. "Step away from the crowd. We need to speak with you regarding elder financial exploitation and fraud." "This is a misunderstanding," Susan cried out, her voice cracking as the ultimate humiliation set in. "I am her daughter. I have the power of attorney." "We have an emergency injunction from the probate judge stating otherwise," the social worker replied coldly, not breaking stride as she headed straight for the front door to secure my grandmother. Within 5 minutes, the social worker gently guided Grandma Maggie out the front door. She was clutching her small overnight bag, but as she looked at me, the terror in her eyes was completely gone. She gave me the tiniest, proudest nod. I walked over, wrapped my arm protectively around her frail shoulders, and guided her toward my car. I didn't look back until I reached the passenger side door. Chloe was sitting on the pristine green lawn, sobbing hysterically into her hands, completely ignored by the neighbors who were now leaving in droves. Susan was standing perfectly still next to the police cruiser, her face completely drained of blood, trapped in the absolute ruins of her fake, perfect life. I locked eyes with my mother one final time, opened the car door for my grandmother, and drove away. If you love this story and want more intense, satisfying drama, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share the video with your friends to keep these stories coming.